Hello to everyone out there. I hope you guys are doing well. In today's video, we are going to be implementing the edit property functionality to our application. And to get started, we are going to make some changes to our server. So here I am in the apartment model in my server. And we're going to add some new fields to this model. And in order to do that, we're going to need some new imports. So I'm just going to paste those here. And we're getting this because we haven't implemented time yet. And I think you might have to get this package, can't really remember. But if that's the case, just do a control period for that. Now let's implement those fields. And those fields are going to be square feet, rent, deposit, lease length, available on, active, images, amenities, and description. So we'll save that and go to the property model. And here we need to add some fields as well. So the first will be name, amenities, included utilities, images, description, email, first name, last name, laundry type, on market, parking fee, pets allowed, country code, calling code, phone number, and website. And here let's add this as an import. Now you could normalize this data, but for right now we're just going to keep it like this. So with this done, let's go to the property route and create a new function to update a property. And we'll do that underneath the delete property function. So let's create that function here. Within this function, we're going to get the ID, which will be a passed in parameter. And based upon that, we will get the property from our database. And if there's an error that occurs during that, we'll just send to the user that we got an internal server error. Now at this point, we'll create some data structures for what the body should look like. So let's start off with the update apartment input. And it should have all of these different fields. Let's import time here. And the struct for the property input, whenever we're updating it, should look something like this. So with those created, we will check the JSON of the body and make sure that it is valid. And if it is valid, then we'll start to update apartment data. So we'll need to create all of these different variables. This is all pertaining to the property, and any new apartments will be added to this slice, and we will bulk insert those into our database. Now let's map through the apartments in the passed in input. And when going through the apartments, if the bedroom low is less than the current bedroom low, then we'll assign that. And then same thing for bathroom low, rent low, and vice versa for bathroom high, bedroom high, and rent high. Next, we'll need to marshal the current apartment amenities. Then we'll create an apartment object. And if the apartment already has an ID, that means it's already been created. So we just need to update the apartment and the images. So we'll have to create a new function to do that. But if it hasn't been, then we need to append that current apartment to our new apartments slice. And we'll also have to append the apartment images to our new apartments images slice. And now I'm going to create this function to update apartments and images. Down here, we'll create that function. So first we'll get the apartment ID, and then we will insert those images to our S3 bucket, and we'll want it to return an array of URLs for the images. So if the length of that array is greater than 0, then we'll marshal that and then put it into our database as the images field. And at the end, we will just update that apartment in our database. So here, let's import string convert. And now let's create this struct along with this function. So that struct insert images is going to have an images field, property ID, and apartment ID. So here we'll create that function, and we'll start off with an images array, which will just be a string slice. So we'll map through each image within the passed in images. And if it contains HTTP, that means it's already in our bucket. But if it doesn't, then we need to add it to our bucket. So first we'll create a random ID for the image. Then we'll create the base endpoint for the image. And if there's an apartment ID associated with the image, then we'll need to append apartment onto the image string. And at the end here, we'll add a slash along with the image ID. Then we'll upload that image to our S3 bucket and append the URL to this images array slice. And down here, if it doesn't contain HTTP, then we'll just add it back into the images array slice. Now here, let's add these imports. And go back up into the update property function. Now let's close this off. Outside of this for loop, we'll create the new apartments. So with those created, we'll loop through each apartment and update the apartment with its images. So why do we have to first create the apartment and then update the images? Well, we're doing that because each image relies upon the apartment ID. And if you haven't created the apartment yet, it doesn't have an ID. So that's why we're doing it the way that we are. Next, we'll marshal the property amenities and the included utilities. Then we will assign various different fields to the property based upon the property input. And here it looks like I missed 2 fields for our property. So I'm going to go back into that model and add those here. Now we'll insert those property images, get the array of URLs, marshal that, and then assign images within the property to that marshaled array of URLs. Then we'll update the property, and if we get an error during that, we'll send that to the user. Otherwise, we will just send that we have no content. So that is how you can update the property. Now let's go into main.go and add this as an endpoint. We'll put this underneath the delete endpoint, and it will be a patch endpoint, and it will be calling the update property function. So with this done, let's start up our server, and we will head over to the application code. All right, so here I am in the constants file, and first thing I'm going to do is just add in the endpoint to update a property. Next, we're going to head to our app.tsx file, and here where we are creating our query client, let's cut this and create that outside of the app component. And we'll come back to this file in a bit, but right now, let's go and change our types so that they will match with what we have on the server. So I'm going to start with apartments. And I'm going to add in deposit, lease length, available on, active, amenities, and description. Next, let's go to edit property initial values. And let's add in name and website. I'm going to go to properties next, or the property type, I should say. And within this, we'll make name either be string or undefined. We'll add in country code, calling code, description, included utilities, amenities, pets allowed, laundry type, parking fee, first name, and last name. And then down in the create property type, we'll add in apartments, which will be an object array having unit, bedrooms, bathrooms, active, and available on. Now I'm going to go to where we are using create property, and I'm going to add in these active and available on fields to those objects. So navigate to the add property section, and here we are creating those apartment objects. So we need to add in the active field and the available on field. So outside of this if statement, I'm going to create a new date for the current date called available on. And for each of these objects, I'm going to set active to true and pass in available on. And now I'm going to go modify some code. So up here, I was doing this, I can get rid of this now. And instead of having to refetch, I can just use the query client to invalidate the my properties query. And that will cause a refetch on its own. So here I'm just gonna import use query client from React Query. I'll get the reference to that query client, and then here we'll just say query client dot validate queries my properties. Now, thinking over the design of the app, I was pondering about the loading screen and what we should do about that. Because in some instances, it will work fine, but currently if I go and delete a property, you'll see that it just doesn't look that good. So let me go do that. View my properties. Let's go delete this. And you see there was this little glitch in there where we showed a lottie view saying that we had no properties. And the card is where we call that delete mutation, but it's in the my properties screen that we're actually showing that lottie and these different cards. So I was just pondering if there's a better way to do it. And one solution that I came up with is just to create a global loading state, and we'll just use the context for that. So that's what I'm going to implement, and then we'll do a little bit of refactoring, or we'll use it a little bit, but then in some instances, like right here, we'll have to refactor in another video. So let's go to the context file and go and add in a loading context. And loading context will have a field loading, which will be a Boolean, and then set loading, which is this void function. Now let's go into app.tsx and create a loading context provider. And along with that, we'll need to create a state for loading. And we'll do that here. So I'm just going to copy this. This will be a Boolean now. Boolean. It'll be initialized to false. And here, we'll set this to loading and set loading. Now we just will copy in this and change it to loading and set loading. Loading. And I'm going to go create a hook to access set loading. So here we'll create a new file called use loading. And we'll import use context, loading context, and then export loading and set loading from the use context hook, passing in loading context. And now let's go into the screen component. And here we'll import loading and use loading. And we'll extract the loading state from use loading. And here we'll say if loading is true, then we'll want to return the loading component. Otherwise, we'll return the children. And now we need to go into loading because we're actually calling screen, or we're using screen there. So if we don't get rid of that, then we will run into an infinite loop, essentially. So here we'll get rid of that and make that a view instead. View. And here in the container, instead of this flex, I'm going to give it a height equal to the height of the screen, and same thing with width equal to the width of the screen. Now we can go into the card component and use the use loading hook. So here we'll say const loading, or set loading rather, is equal to use loading. And on mutate, we will set loading to true. On error, we'll set it to false. And same thing here with onsettled. And I'm pretty sure we don't have to specify this twice because onsettled should run for both, but whatever, just in case. So now let's go and try this out. So we'll go to view properties and delete one of these. So we'll delete this property, and there we can see that it worked. So with that done, I'm going to close some of these tabs up top, and we can get started in editing properties. So let's navigate to the edit property screen, and let's go there within the application. In last video, we pretty much completed the UI for the edit property screen. We just now need to add in the validation logic for the form. So to get started with that, I'm going to import yup. And down at the bottom of this screen, I'm going to create that validation schema. Now for our schema, we'll start off with a yup object, and we'll have a unit type, and then apartments, and depending on if the unit type is multiple or single, that will change what is required. And specifically, it's just going to change the unit. And unfortunately, I haven't found a better way. So here we're going to have to duplicate this code for both objects. It's just that the unit needs to be required in cases where multiple is true, but it does not need to be required in cases where the unit type is single. So yeah, this is what that's going to look like. Now outside of apartments, we'll have description, images, included utilities, pets allowed, laundry type, parking fee, amenities, name, first name, last name, email, calling code, country code, phone number, website, and on market. And we're going to have to add in a few of these. I don't think we have name in our UI yet, or country code and calling code. These aren't within our values either. Down below this validation schema, I'm going to create a new type for what our edit property object should look like whenever we're sending it to the server. So with these created, let's go into the format component and add in that validation schema. And here within our initial values, we aren't actually taking into account any of the pre-existing values within the property, except for maybe this unit type. But here for images, if the property had any images, we wouldn't be showing them, and same thing for included utilities and all of these. So let's make some changes to those. And before we do that, I'm going to create a new variable for property.data.data. So I'm going to do this underneath the phone ref. So let's just go and change out any instances of this. So here's one, Control H, property data. Okay, and here is another instance. So now let's go make some changes to the initial values. And our first value is going to be the unit type, which is just going to be like last time. Second one will be initial apartments. Third will be the property description if that exists, otherwise empty string. Next will be property images if those exist, otherwise empty array. Included utilities, pets allowed. If there are any of those, then we will filter the pet values for the current pets allowed value. Otherwise, it will just be the first item in the array. Same thing with laundry type. Parking fee will coincide with the property data's parking fee, otherwise it'll be an empty string. Amenities, name. For the first name, if the property has a first name associated with it, we'll use that. Otherwise, if there's a user first name, we'll use that. Otherwise, it's an empty string. And same thing with last name. And we'll do the same thing for email. And it looks like we need to go and add this to the property type. Then we'll have country code, calling code, phone number, and website. Now let's go make some changes to the initial apartments. And pretty much for everything, we're just going to see if it already has a value. And if it does, we're going to set it to that value. Otherwise, we'll just keep it as what we had it. And here we need to add an ID to temp apartment. So ID, that's going to be a number. Now let's go make some changes to our components down below so that they account for the validation schema and when there are errors. So the first thing we're going to do, or the first change we need to make, is with unit inputs. We'll add in a unit type prop and pass in the current unit type. So let's go add that to units input. Here we'll add in that unit type prop, and that will either be a string or undefined. And it looks like we need to go modify the temp apartment type so that this is optional. And here in the add unit function, we'll make some changes. so that we set the unit type to multiple if new apartments.length is greater than 1 and the unit type is not multiple. And for remove unit, we'll do something similar, just the inverse. So now we're going to go change the errors and captions for different inputs. So for each of these, if apartments has been touched, we just want to make sure that the particular input has been touched. So here for the caption, since this is the unit input, we want to make sure that the unit was touched and that the unit has errors associated with it. And we'll do the same thing for square feet, rent, and deposit, and the lease length. And now here I'm just going to import picker item. And here where we are showing this date time picker, we need to actually get rid of this particular date time picker because it doesn't work on iOS, and we're gonna substitute it out with a different one. So this is what the new date time picker component is gonna look like, and we need to go and add that up in our imports. So get rid of this and add in a new import for date time picker from React Native Modal date time picker. And if that's not in your project, just do a yarn add or npm install for this package. And it's going to give the same functionality, it's just that this one will work on iOS with our given layout. So those are the changes for unit input. Let's go back to the edit property screen, and we need to make some changes to the contact info component. So we're going to be passing in the name, website, and country code into the component now. So here we'll just add to the extensive list of props for name, website, and country code. All will be required strings. And within this, we will add in an input for the name, an input for the website, and we'll make some modifications to the phone input. So let's go into the phone input component. Go ahead and add in some new props, which are going to be country code, error, and on blur. And within the component, we need to pass in the value as the phone number to our RN phone input component. We'll set the border color to theme color danger 500 if there is an error, and if the on blur prop exists, then we'll call that. And down here, we'll specify that it can either meet this condition or error can be present to display this error text. So now let's go back, we'll save these and go back to the edit property screen. We'll save this, and if we touch on that, we touch on rent, we'll get these various different. Now back in the edit property screen, I'm going to put something underneath this contact info component for whenever the user still has errors. I'm just going to tell them that they have errors above and they should check them. So here, if they go down here, they'll see check your errors above, and they have this. So with that out of the way, let's go and create the onSubmit function. So within onSubmit, we'll first get the calling code and country code of the current phone number. Then we'll create a new apartments array, and for each apartment, we'll just pass in the apartment into the new apartments array. And then we'll create an edit property object to eventually push to the server. And here I'm going to need to make some changes to this type and also import picker item. So here it looks like I need to go and modify the temp apartment type, and I think it has to do with show calendar. So let's just go there. Temp apartment, show calendar is an optional boolean. Square feet can either be a string or number. Rent will be string or number. Deposit will be a string or number. And let's go see. Yep, okay, so that's what I was looking for. And here, looks like on market does not exist within our values, so we need to go and change that. So on market is going to be equal to property data dot on market, if that exists. Otherwise it will be false. And down where we have the publish button, we will set the field on market to true whenever that is the case. Okay, so now let's create the mutation, which we will pass this object into. For that, we'll have to import use mutation. We'll call this mutation edit property, and we will just call the endpoint to update a property, passing in the property ID and the object. And we'll set loading to true whenever it is mutating. We'll set it to false if there's an error, and we'll set it to false on success as well. So let's import use loading as well. Get rid of, or put this up above. We need to get the query client and navigation. So const navigation is equal to use navigation. And query client, that'll be coming from React Query. Alright, now we need to call this within the onSubmit function. So beneath this object, let's call it here, edit property.mutate, passing in our object. Now we can test this out. So let's go and add a photo. We will crop this. And then let's go add some square footage. It's going to be 1,000 a month. This needs to be something relevant. So we'll have to change something there. I think for some reason our dates weren't adding up whenever we submitted that for the apartment. Here, let's change this to something like this. And we'll save that. And now we should see our update apartment. If we see going into here, we will see some of our stuff. Let's give this apartment a name. And we'll give it some additional photos. And you can see that it is updating. Alright, so after doing some digging, we need to go into our server and just make a minor change whenever we are creating properties so that the date doesn't show 5 days after Jesus was born, or actually 6 days, my bad. So yeah, let's go into the server and make that change right now. So here in the create property function within the property file, we are appending different apartments to an apartment slice, and we are only doing 3 fields currently, whereas we need to add in 2 different fields, one being active, and that's going to be equal to element.active. So we're going to have to change that a bit. Element.active, that's actually going to be a pointer. So let's go down into this property input. So here for the apartment input, let's create a new struct called create apartment input, or we're just really going to relabel this, and we're going to add in this active field and available on field, and then we'll rename this to create property input. And then let's go into the create property function. This will be create property input now, and this will have the active on or available on, and that will be element.available on. And now this should work. So let me restart this. All right, so let's test this out, creating a new property. So this one will be 654 or 645 Detroit, Michigan. Whew, there we go. So that is the current date, and that is exactly what we want. So now we just have one more change for this video. It's going to be in the app, and it's going to be on the message screen, and we're just going to change out the date picker there, because this date picker doesn't work on iOS in the way that we want it to. Or actually it will on this screen. It's just going to be inconsistent with our other date picker, so that's why we're changing it. So here we'll import the new date time picker, and we will swap out that old date time picker with this new one, giving it these different fields. Alright, I think that's it for this video. Thank you guys for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.